They said the barn was worthless, just rotting wood and rusted nails on a forgotten patch of land. But when a broke war veteran handed over his last $10 for it, he uncovered something no one expected. Because inside that collapsing structure wasn't dust or junk. It was a colossal black horse guard starving and hiding a secret powerful enough to change everything he thought he knew about survival, loyalty, and fate. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe. Elias Grant had learned long ago that life could strip a man down to the bone without so much as a warning. At 43, he carried himself with the quiet resignation of someone who had seen too much, lost too much, and expected little more from the years ahead. Once in another life, he'd worn a uniform and flown halfway across the world to fight in a war that had promised honor and purpose. The medals he had been handed afterward, tarnished discs in a drawer he never opened, were proof that promises broke easily. Now he lived in Red Hollow, Montana, a wind-battered town tucked into the folds of the northern plains where winters were long and summers unforgiving. Red Hollow had been built on cattle money and family ranches, but time had hollowed it out, just like the name suggested. Barns leaned into the wind, as if begging to be pushed over. Fields sprouted more weeds than hay, and houses sagged with the weight of generations that no longer lived in them. Elias didn't own one of those houses. He rented a single room above the old hardware store where the paint flaked from the windowsills and the plumbing coughed each morning like an old smoker. He worked odd jobs fixing fences, stacking hay bales, cutting wood, but steady employment never seemed to last. Men in Red Hollow didn't hire other men for long when there wasn't enough work to keep their own sons fed. His body carried reminders of the war. A limp in his left leg, subtle but constant, slowed him just enough to make ranchers look elsewhere for help. Nights brought their own punishment, the restless tossing the dreams he never spoke of, and the silence afterward when dawn crept through the blinds. He had grown used to living with little more than his own company. That morning, as he patted his pocket and felt the thin shape of a single crumpled bill, Elias knew exactly how little remained. $10. His last 10. Enough for maybe a meal and a cup of weak coffee, but not enough to cover next week's rent, not enough to fix the truck that hadn't started in months, not enough to stop the feeling that the ground was slipping out from beneath him. It was in this state of quiet desperation that he first heard about Jonah Mercer. Jonah appears. Jonah Mercer had lived in Red Hollow longer than anyone could remember. Some said he was 75, others swore he was pushing 80, but no one knew for sure because Jonah himself couldn't always recall. He wandered town like a ghost in worn flannel and boots that had seen better decades, muttering half conversations with people who weren't there. Children whispered that he was crazy. Adults shrugged and said dementia had been gnawing at his mind for years. That afternoon, as Elias leaned against the fence of a vacant lot, trying to decide whether to spend his last money on food or a bottle of cheap whiskey, Nolan Graves, the neighbor who always seemed to know everyone's business, mentioned that Jonah was looking to sell something. "Old man Mercer's got a barn out on the East Road," Nolan said, spitting dust from his lip. "Says he wants rid of it. Can't keep up anymore. Told me he'd let it go for cheap." How cheap, Elias asked, though he already knew he didn't have the luxury of asking. Nolan shrugged. "Didn't say. But knowing Jonah, you could probably buy the whole damn thing for pocket change." Pocket change. Elias reached into his jeans and felt the lonely bill crinkle between his fingers. Later that day, Elias found Jonah waiting near the outskirts of town, standing in the shadow of a rusted pickup, whose tires were nearly bald. The old man's clothes were wrinkled, his hair uncombed, but his eyes, at least for that moment, were sharp. "You him?" Jonah asked, his voice rasping like dry leaves. "Depends who's asking." Jonah chuckled at nothing in particular. "Name's Mercer. Got a barn. Don't want it anymore. You want it." Elias squinted at him. "A barn. Good for storage," Jonah said, nodding vigorously. Good for storage, $10. Elias blinked. 10. The old man bobbed his head again, already fishing in his coat pocket for a folded scrap of paper. The bargain. They walked across a field choked with weeds until the barn came into view. It leaned like a drunk toward the west, its boards gray and splintered roof patched with rusted tin that rattled when the wind shifted. A place long forgotten, not worth the nails that held it together. Jonah gestured with a trembling hand. There it is, $10. Good deal. Elias frowned. Even falling apart a barn was worth more than that, if only for the lumber. Something felt off. Why so cheap, he asked. Jonah smiled a strange lopsided grin that showed more gum than teeth. Don't need it anymore. Just good for storage. That's all. Good for storage. He repeated the phrase like a chant, as if it explained everything. The old man shoved a slip of paper into Elias's hand. It wasn't a proper deed. Not really just a crude document scrawled in shaky handwriting. I, Jonah Mercer, sell the barn on East Road for $10. A place for a signature already signed. Elias looked up. You're serious? Jonah's gaze darted around nervously, scanning the empty field as though someone might be listening. His eyes flickered sharp and lucid 1 second, clouded and confused the next. For a heartbeat, Elias thought he saw fear in them. Don't open it till I'm gone, Jonah whispered. His tone shifted, no longer casual, but urgent. You hear me? Don't open the doors until I'm down the road. Elias stiffened. Why not? Jonah shook his head violently, the grin gone now. Just don't. Give me time to get home first, then it's yours. $10. The wind picked up, lifting dust across the field. Elias studied the barn, then the man. Everything about the moment screamed trouble. But $10 was all he had, and in his pocket the bill felt like a mocking reminder that he had nothing left to lose. With a sigh, he pulled it free and pressed it into Jonah's palm. The old man closed his fingers over it, as if Elias had handed him treasure. Done, Jonah said softly. Then louder, almost to himself, good for storage. Good for storage. He turned and shuffled toward his pickup, muttering under his breath. Elias's inner conflict. Elias stood alone before the barn, the flimsy slip of paper still crumpled in his fist. The wind rattled the tin roof, each clang echoing like a warning. $10, he thought. The last 10 I'll ever see. And for what, a pile of rotting wood? He remembered days overseas when $10 could buy a man a hot meal and a bottle of soda that tasted like home. He remembered how men had gambled with their lives over less. And now here he was gambling what little future he had on a barn that should have been torn down years ago. He glanced at the retreating truck, Jonah's figure hunched behind the wheel. The old man hadn't even looked back. There had been something in his eyes, though, something Elias couldn't shake. Urgency, fear, and that strange insistence. Don't open it until I'm gone. Elias pressed a hand against the scar that pulled tight across his thigh, a relic of shrapnel and fire. The pain never fully left, just like the memories. On the battlefield, instincts had kept him alive. Gut feelings that whispered when danger lurked. And right now, those instincts told him that behind those barn doors waited something more than dust and cobwebs. $10, he muttered aloud, shaking his head. Last 10 I had, and I just bought myself trouble. But trouble, he knew, was better than nothing at all. The sound of Jonah's pickup truck faded into the distance, the rattle of its loose exhaust pipe echoing until it vanished into the dry Montana wind. When the dust settled, silence claimed the clearing again. Elias Grant stood alone in front of the barn, the brittle paper deed wrinkled in his palm. He stared at it as though it were a joke scribbled by a child, a promise written in crooked lines that carried no weight at all. $10 for a rotting barn. $10 for what felt even now like another bad decision in a life full of them. the wind shifted. Grass shivered on the hillside, and the loose tin roofing overhead clattered like bones shaken in a can. Elias squinted up at the structure. It leaned badly weather-beaten and stubborn against time, but still clinging to its shape. He should have turned away right then. Should have shoved the paper into his pocket, walked back to town, and let the whole deal rot like everything else in Red Hollow. But Jonah's words chased themselves in circles inside his head, refusing to let him move on. Don't open it till I'm gone. Don't open the doors until I'm down the road. Why? If the place was as worthless as it looked, why the secrecy? Why the insistence that Elias wait until he was out of sight? He could still see Jonah's face in his mind, those fleeting flashes of lucidity, the darting eyes, the nervous tremor in his voice. The man had looked as though the barn itself carried a secret he couldn't bear to face. Elias flexed his fingers around the deed. The edges cut into his palm. He felt the old stirring in his chest, the same sensation that had risen countless times on deployment, when he'd been told to advance into rooms that might hide insurgents' explosives, or nothing at all. The pounding heart, the sharp awareness, the knowledge that once he opened the door, there would be no undoing it. He licked his lips dry from the wind. The taste of dust sat heavy on his tongue. With a slow breath, he stepped toward the barn. The padlock was gone if there had ever been one. Only a thick, rusted iron latch remained hanging crooked against the warped boards. Elias reached for it, fingers brushing the cold metal. His hand trembled slightly, though, whether from the evening chill or anticipation, he couldn't say. He pulled. The latch groaned in protest, stubborn with years of rust. He tugged harder, the squeal of metal against metal splitting the silence like a scream. Finally, with a sharp jerk, the mechanism gave way. Elias shoved at the door. The wood-resisted hinges shrieking as though offended at being disturbed. A narrow crack opened first, spilling a shaft of light into the darkness beyond. The air that rushed out hit him like a slap. The smell was thick, layered old hay gone sour manure that had dried and lingered, and something else. Something raw and unmistakably alive. Elias stiffened. His chest tightened, instinct snapping into place. He knew that smell. The scent of an animal still breathing, still clinging to life inside. He widened the gap. The shadows within seemed to retreat reluctantly, giving ground only where the sun intruded. Inside it was nearly black, the gloom swallowing detail. The door moaned again as he forced it open wider, until the creak of the hinges became a steady wail that echoed across the empty clearing. His pulse hammered. Every nerve stood at attention like the moments before breaching a room overseas, when he had braced for anything, for bullets, for fire, for silence. Now he braced for... he didn't know what. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust. At first, he saw nothing but the dark outline of the barn's interior. The slanted roof beams, the tattered bales of hay crumbling in the corner, a water trough lined with cobwebs. Then something shifted. A bulk. A massive shape huddled in the farthest shadow, so still it had blended into the darkness. The movement was subtle, a sway more than a step, but it sent a chill down Elias's spine. He froze every muscle tight. Slowly, carefully, the shape lifted its head. The shaft of light touched it. Elias sucked in a breath. A horse. Not just a horse. A giant. Black as coal, towering even in its weakened stance. Its frame loomed against the back wall, ribs showing stark beneath a dull coat that once must have shone like polished obsidian. Its mane hung in tangled ropes, its tail dragging like a lifeless banner. But the detail that seized Elias's gaze and refused to let go was the scar On the left shoulder, a burn stretched across the flesh in a warped line, twisted and ugly, as though iron had been pressed there or fire had licked deep into the hide. The mark shone faintly, even in shadow, an old wound that would never fade. The animal's eyes met his. Not the wide, innocent eyes of a typical horse, but something else wild, fierce, yet laced with a haunting plea. In them, Elias saw both a challenge and a cry for help, as if the creature itself could not decide which it wanted more, to fight him or to be saved by him. He swallowed hard. Around the animal lay the evidence of neglect, a bucket overturned, and dry hay reduced to dust tack and rope left in a heap to rot. No fresh tracks of care, no signs of feeding, nothing but abandonment. For a moment, Elias could only stand there, stunned. Jesus. The word slipped out without thought. His voice sounded small in the cavernous space. $10. For this, the reality struck him with brutal clarity. He hadn't just bought a barn. He had bought a secret. A living, breathing secret that someone had locked away and left to waste. He took a step forward, eyes still locked on the horse. The animal's ears flicked back, muscles tensing as though it might bolt, but it didn't move. Couldn't move. Too weak. Elias's mind spun. He had grown up around horses. He knew their language, their silences. And everything about this one screamed starvation. Weeks, maybe longer. It stood on legs that trembled under its own weight sides, heaving shallowly. It was alive by stubbornness alone. He felt anger stir sharp and hot. Who would do this? Who would leave an animal like this to die? And why had Jonah sold him the barn with such frantic urgency? Had the old man forgotten the horse inside? Or had he wanted it? Hidden, passed on like a cursed relic. Elias's stomach turned. He remembered long nights overseas when he had watched men bleed out, when the choice had been to intervene or let them fade. And he remembered the guilt afterward, the questions that had haunted him. Could he have done more? Could he have saved one more life? Looking at the horse, those questions rose again like ghosts. He clenched his fists. No, he muttered to himself. Not this time. The horse shifted legs, quivering. A low sound rumbled in its chest, a half whinny, half groan. The noise scraped at Elias's insides. He stepped closer, boots crunching on straw. The horse flinched, but only barely. There was no strength left in it to resist. Elias's breath misted in the cool shade. He studied the scar again, the raw cruelty of it, and felt a chill crawl up his spine. Jonah didn't just sell me a barn, he thought grimly. He sold me a burden. He sold me this. The horse's eyes tracked him, dark pools reflecting both defiance and desperation. Elias shivered. Somewhere deep in his gut, he knew this was no ordinary discovery. Whatever path lay ahead, it had begun the moment he opened those doors. And it would not be simple. The barn was still dark behind him, its shadow stretching across the dirt as the sun slid lower in the western sky. Elias hadn't moved since he first laid eyes on the great black horse. He stood there like a man, rooted heart still thudding from the discovery. The animal's faint whinny echoed in his ears, a sound that had pierced deeper than he wanted to admit. Then another sound reached him. Engines. More than one. Elias turned his head sharply, instincts prickling. A low rumble rolled across the dry fields, growing louder. Dust rose in the distance, curling above the ridge like smoke from a grass fire. Within moments, 3 trucks appeared on the dirt road, barreling toward the clearing in a tight column. The first was a silver Ford with a dented grille. The second and third followed close, kicking up such a storm of dust that the sinking sun painted the whole road blood red. Elias narrowed his eyes. Whoever they weren't just passing through. They were coming for him. The vehicles braked hard in front of the barn gravel, crunching under heavy tires. Engines cut off the sudden silence, filled with the tick of cooling metal. Doors slammed. A woman was first out, 40, maybe a little older. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt, her hair tied back, her face flushed with urgency. Behind her came two young men in their 20s. One was broad-shouldered, fists already clenched, as if the fight was decided before it began. The other moved slower, more careful, but the tension in his jaw gave away his unease. The woman spotted Elias immediately and strode toward him. Dust clung to her boots with each step. Her expression carried a strange mix: anger, fear, and something close to heartbreak. Elias braced himself. He had the sense he was about to be judged for something he didn't yet understand. Did he do it? The woman demanded before she'd even reached him. Her voice cracked with emotion. Did my father do it again? Elias frowned. If you mean sell me this place. He held up the crumpled deed in his hand. Then yes. $10. It's mine now. The woman stopped just short of him, hands trembling at her sides. Good Lord. Her voice dropped into a hoarse whisper. He actually did it. Behind her, the younger of the two men muttered something under his breath. The older one, broad-shouldered, shifted impatiently, like a dog straining against a leash. The woman's eyes glistened. Do you have any idea what you've just gotten yourself into? Elias squared his shoulders, though, a knot twisted in his stomach. I made a legal purchase. Paid him fair. He signed. The woman let out a brittle laugh that was closer to a sob. Legal, she shook her head fiercely. My father hasn't been of sound mind in years. He suffers from dementia. Half the time he can't remember what day it is, let alone which property he owns. He doesn't have the legal capacity to sell you anything. Her words hit Elias harder than he expected. He looked down at the paper in his hand. The shaky scrawl of Jonah's name, the pitiful bargain for $10. Suddenly it all made bitter sense. So that was it. He hadn't made a lucky deal. He had just emptied his last bill into the hands of a man too broken to know what he was doing. The knot in Elias's gut tightened. Don't play dumb, the older son snapped, suddenly stepping forward. He had fire in his eyes, and Elias could see that he was the kind who led with fists before words. You opened it, didn't you? The barn. Elias's mouth was dry. He flicked his gaze back toward the gaping doors behind him where, inside, the colossal horse still shifted weakly. He said nothing. The young man's temper exploded. Damn you, you did! His voice rose to a shout echoing off the wooden walls. That horse inside is worth more than you'll ever see in your life. You think you can keep him, what, with a $10 bill? Is that your plan? Elias didn't move as the young man stormed closer, stabbing a finger toward his chest. The other brother, slimmer, tried to pull him back. Caleb, stop. This isn't, but Caleb was beyond stopping. He crowded into Elias's space, his voice hot with fury. You don't know what you've gotten into. That horse is ours. Ours, you've got no right. For a heartbeat, Elias considered putting the man flat on his back. He still had the reflexes, the training. But those days were gone, and this wasn't a battlefield. He forced calm into his tone. I didn't know what was in there, Elias said evenly. I thought I was buying a rotted shack, nothing more. That's the truth. Caleb's face twisted, disbelieving. But something in Elias's level gaze made him falter. His hand dropped through the anger still radiated off him in waves. Rebecca moved between them, quickly pushing her son back a step. She lifted her chin, addressing Elias with steel in her voice now. My father has been selling off anything he can get his hands on. He doesn't know what he's doing. We filed for guardianship, but the courts move slow. Until it's approved, he's been bleeding money, signing things away to strangers like you." Elias clenched his jaw. "Strangers like me, I gave him what he asked." He was clear sharp enough when he pressed that paper into my hand. That's called a good faith purchase. Good faith doesn't change the law. Rebecca's eyes were fierce, though wet at the edges. "He didn't have the right to sell you this. He doesn't even remember what's his anymore." Maybe he remembered this time Elias countered. He knew exactly what he was doing. He looked me in the eye. Her laugh was sharp, bitter. For 1 minute, maybe. Then he forgot by the next. "You can't use my father's fleeting moments of clarity as justification." The air between them grew taut heavy, like the split second before a storm tears open the sky. Caleb muttered a curse. Ryan rubbed his temple, trying to hold back the tide. "We're wasting time," he said softly. "Arguing isn't helping." But no one listened. A sound broke through the tension. From inside the barn, weak and ragged, came the low whinny of the black horse. Everyone turned. Shadow shifted in the gloom, his massive frame swaying on unsteady legs. His head drooped, muzzle nearly brushing the floor. His labored breath rasped into the silence, loud as a hammer. Elias felt it like a blade to the chest. He saw the ribs, the trembling leg, the way each inhale seemed to hurt. He saw not wealth, not property, not some prize to be fought over. He saw an animal on the edge of death. He swallowed hard, his throat tight. "While we stand here arguing," he said quietly, "it's dying." The words hung there. Rebecca blinked, tears gathering. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, as if he'd been caught guilty of something. Even Caleb's rage flickered uncertain in the face of the truth. Elias stepped closer to the barn door, eyes never leaving the horse. "I don't care about what it's worth. I don't care who claims it on paper. All I see is an animal that needs help now. Not tomorrow. Now." The barn had gone so still that even the dust seemed to hang motionless in the air. Elias felt every eye on him as he stepped past the threshold and into the gloom, his boots crunching on brittle straw. He raised a hand toward the enormous shadow slumped against the far wall. "Look at it," he said. His voice echoed in the rafters. "Really look." The Mercers hesitated in the doorway, dust motes swirling around their boots as the evening light bled in behind them. Shadow shifted faintly, lifting his head at the sound of Elias's tone. The sight was gutting. The once mighty stallion's body was a skeletal outline beneath a dull black coat. The hollows between his ribs carved deep shadows of their own. Muscles that should have been thick and rippling were wasted, trembling with each unsteady movement. When he shifted weight, his front left leg faltered, dragging slightly before catching. "He's lame," Elias said, pointing. "That leg's bad. Old injury untreated. He's walking on pain, maybe infection." He moved closer, careful not to spook the animal, though Shadow barely had the energy to flinch. Elias crouched, studying the horse's dull eyes, the cracked lips of his muzzle. The faint rasp of every breath scraped the silence raw. "See the glaze in his eyes? That's dehydration. He hasn't had clean water in days." Elias glanced back at the family, his face hard. "If we keep standing here arguing about paperwork, he won't last the night. He'll be dead before you finish deciding whose signature matters." Rebecca flinched as though struck. Caleb's jaw tightened, anger warring with something else, fear maybe. Ryan looked away altogether, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Rebecca took a shaky step forward. Her lips pressed tight as she stared at the horse, then at Elias. For the first time since she arrived, the fire in her voice softened into something else. grief. When he was himself, she began quietly, "My father cared for Shadow every day. Fed him before he fed himself. Brushed his coat until it gleamed. He wouldn't go to bed without checking that Shadow was settled." Her eyes glossed as she swallowed. Then the dementia came on worse. At first, he forgot small things, where he left the bucket, which pasture was which. But soon, he couldn't manage it all. And none of us. Her voice cracked the last words almost a whisper. None of us could take his place. Ryan broke the silence, his tone flat, brittle. "We tried." He stared at the ground as if ashamed. But between Dad's medicine and the nursing home, every dime vanished. We had to choose. Between him and the horse, Elias said. Ryan's shoulders sagged. And we chose him. We told ourselves we'd find a way for Shadow later. But later never came. Rebecca shut her eyes, a tear sliding down her cheek. Caleb looked furious, but Elias recognized it for what it was, rage born of helplessness. He had seen the same expression on soldiers who'd watched brothers fall in combat with nothing they could do to stop it. Elias's chest tightened. For all their anger, for all their accusations, the Mercers weren't villains. They were drowning in a storm of debt and disease, and Shadow had been the one left stranded. Silence hung heavy. Dust filtered through a beam of sunlight that cut across Shadow's withered flank. Elias exhaled slowly and rose to his feet. He looked at the family, then back at the dying horse, then again at them. "This is the truth," he said. "You're the rightful owners. On paper, it's yours. But you don't have the means to keep him alive. And me?" He tapped the crumpled deed in his pocket. "I don't have the right. But I do have the will. I grew up with horses. I know how to keep one breathing, even one this far gone. That's the situation, plain and simple." Caleb spat into the dirt, glaring. "And what, so you just declare yourself his savior? You think because you stumbled into this mess, it gives you the right to decide? You're not family. I don't want to be." Elias shot back. His voice was low but steady. "I didn't come here looking to claim anything. I don't care about bloodlines or bank value. But I won't stand by while you let him die in a cage because the paperwork's inconvenient." The words struck like flint. Rebecca's face twisted with guilt. Ryan looked like he might speak, but stopped himself. Caleb's fists balled at his side's chest, heaving his fury, threatening to ignite again. But Elias didn't move, didn't blink. He stood firm in the shadows of the barn, the great black stallion breathing raggedly behind him. "Property, money, family names," Elias said. "All of it means nothing if he's gone by morning. The only question that matters is who's going to save him, because someone has to." Now, the stillness was suffocating. Every creak of the rafters seemed louder than their own breaths. The truth Elias had laid bare hung between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Rebecca wiped her face roughly. Ryan shifted again, troubled. Caleb growled something under his breath, but offered no real answer. In the end, there was only the sound of Shadow's breathing shallow and labored, filling the silence with urgency no words could match. Elias turned away from them, stepping back toward the barn doors. Outside, the Montana sky stretched wide and merciless, painted in the bruised colors of twilight. Wind ripped through the grasslands, carrying red dust that swirled around his boots. He braced a hand against the doorframe, staring out at the horizon. Jonah's voice whispered in his head, uncanny and insistent. "Good for storage. Don't open until I'm gone." Elias closed his eyes, and the weight of it pressing on him. Now he understood. Jonah hadn't been selling a barn. He had been unburdening himself, passing on the responsibility no one else in the family could bear. Whether Jonah had been lucid or lost in fog, some part of him had known Shadow needed someone else. Elias's stomach clenched. If he stepped forward, if he claimed this fight, it would cost him everything. The few dollars in his pocket would vanish. He would risk charges, lawsuits, maybe worse. And for what? For an animal that might not survive the night, even with help. But if he stepped back, if he let the Mercers drag out their arguments while the horse collapsed in the straw, then he would live with the memory of this moment forever. Another failure, another life slipping away because he had chosen safety over action. He could already feel the weight of that guilt heavy as the nights when memories of war pressed him into the mattress until dawn. He clenched his fists, the scars on his knuckles whitening. His breath steamed in the cooling air. Somewhere inside him, something hardened. He opened his eyes and looked back into the barn at the dark giant who swayed on his feet, but still stood still, fought to breathe. "I can't walk away," Elias whispered to himself. His voice was raw, unsteady, but true. He turned back to the Mercer's eyes, clear jaw set. The decision was made. Elias couldn't bear the waiting any longer. His hands felt heavy as he pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen was cracked across one corner, the numbers faint in the glow. He scrolled to the single contact he'd never used before, one passed along by his neighbor Nolan weeks ago. In idle conversation, Dr. Lauren Hayes, veterinarian, Red Hollow and surrounding counties. His thumb hovered only a second before he pressed. The line buzzed in his ear, and then a calm, steady female voice answered. "This is Hayes." Elias didn't waste a second. "Doctor, I've got a horse. It's in bad shape. It's dying. You need to come right now." There was a pause on the other end. "Where are you?" He gave her the location, clipped and hurried. "East Road. Old Mercer Barn." "I'll be there," she said, and the line went dead. Behind him, Rebecca's voice snapped sharp as a whip. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Elias turned, phone still in hand. "Calling the only person who can stop that animal from collapsing tonight." "That horse is our property," Rebecca shot back. "You don't get to make that call." Elias's voice dropped to a low growl, quiet but cutting. "Your property is about to die. If you've got even half the love for it your father once had, you won't stand in the way." For a moment she looked ready to argue again. But then her lips pressed shut, trembling, and she said nothing. It was less than 30 minutes before the faint hum of an approaching truck rolled through the clearing. Elias stepped outside into the open air. The sky was bruising toward dusk, streaked red and violet across the Montana horizon. Dust clouds billowed as a small white pickup rumbled into view, the green and gold logo of Hayes Veterinary Service stenciled across the door. The truck jolted to a stop, gravel spitting. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a woman in her 30s. She wore her hair pulled tight in a ponytail, jeans tucked into worn boots, a stethoscope slung casually around her neck. Her face was sun-hardened, her eyes sharp, but there was a steadiness to her presence that cut through the tension like a clean blade. She swept the scene with a single glance, the ragged family clustered near the barn. Elias, standing apart the structure, looming behind him like a guilty sentinel. "Where is it?" she asked. Elias gestured silently, leading her inside. The stench hit her the second she crossed the threshold. She grimaced, lifting a hand briefly to her nose. "Christ!" Then her eyes found the shape in the corner. Her steps faltered. "Dear God. That's..." She caught her breath. "That's a Clydesdale." Shadow raised his head sluggishly at the sound of her voice, ears flicking. Hayes froze, astonished, before slipping seamlessly back into her professional rhythm. The yaw left her voice, replaced by crisp command. "Clear some space. I need light." Rebecca and Ryan shifted instinctively out of her way. Caleb lingered a beat too long before stepping back as well, scowling. Elias stayed close, his gut churning. Hayes knelt beside Shadow, moving with a mixture of caution and confidence. She began with his muzzle, her palm steady beneath his nostrils. The sound of his breathing rasped against her skin. Respirations shallow, wheezing. She leaned closer, inhaling. Her face tightened. Strong odor. Signs of respiratory distress could be colic or infection. Her hands moved to his neck, pressing into the thin hide, testing the elasticity of his skin. She pulled gently, watched it remain tented instead of snapping back. Severe dehydration. He hasn't had clean water in days. Elias stood silent, watching every detail. Rebecca hugged her arms around herself, as though each word flayed her open. Hayes continued, fingers running along the stallion's shoulder and down his left foreleg. Shadow flinched faintly when she pressed near the joint, but didn't resist. Swelling, Hayes murmured, "Old fracture or untreated trauma. Inflammation, possible infection. That's why he's limping." She lifted his lip, exposing pale gums. The color drained from her expression. Mucous membranes are white. Severe anemia, malnourished. Her checklist was brutal, methodical, final. When she finally sat back on her heels, her face was grim. "This horse is in catastrophic condition," she said. "Dehydrated, malnourished, signs of systemic infection, and that leg untreated, unstable. If he doesn't get fluids, antibiotics, and care in the next 24 hours, the odds of survival drop to almost nothing." No one spoke. The silence pressed down, heavy, broken, only by Shadow's rasping breath. Hayes wiped her hands against her jeans, then stood facing them all with unflinching eyes. "To stabilize him will take at least $1,500. That covers IV fluids, antibiotics, specialized feed and hoof care. And that's just to get him through the next few days. Long-term rehab will be more." Elias's heart sank. He reached for his wallet, pulled it open. Inside, 2 crumpled hundreds, some scattered 20s. Barely 300 in total. His stomach twisted. It might as well have been nothing. Rebecca's fingers dug into her palms. "We don't have it," she whispered. "Every cent we had went to Dad's treatment. The nursing home alone is $3,000 a month." Caleb's jaw clenched, his voice rough. "We want him to live. But wanting doesn't pay the bill. He's our horse, but we can't pull money out of thin air." Elias's fists closed around the leather of his wallet until it creaked. He had nothing left himself. The irony cut deep. The horse could be saved, but not by anyone in this room. Hayes's gaze swept the circle, reading their faces. "I need an answer," she said quietly. "Soon." Shadow lurched suddenly, his massive frame swaying. He staggered a step, then another, legs trembling as if each one might buckle beneath him. A low groan rumbled from his chest. Rebecca gasped. Ryan caught her arm. Hayes dropped to her knees instantly, hands steady as she stroked the horse's neck. "Easy, big guy. Easy." Her voice softened, steady, a lifeline. She glanced back at them, her expression urgent. "He doesn't have long. Every minute we hesitate, his chances shrink. Arguing won't matter if he's dead by morning." Elias felt the old weight pressing down the battlefield, feeling the seconds stretching before a decision that could not be undone. He remembered standing at crossroads in sand-choked alleys, choosing whether to storm a doorway or wait, knowing hesitation meant someone wouldn't make it home. Now that same feeling surged through him. Rebecca's cheeks glistened with tears. Ryan's lips moved, but no words came. Caleb cursed under his breath, pacing like a caged wolf. And Elias. Elias stared at the trembling horse ribs, heaving like bellows, eyes glazed. but still watching him. The air in the barn was suffocating, thick with dust and desperation. Elias stood rigid near the doorway, fists clenched as Shadow swayed dangerously on his feet. The rasp of the horse's breath filled the silence louder than any argument. Then from beyond the fields, a sharp sound split the air. A siren. Low at first, then rising. Elias's stomach dropped. The faint flash of red and blue lights rippled across the distant ridge, growing brighter as vehicles approached. Gravel crunched, engines rumbled. Within minutes, a patrol car rolled into the clearing, followed by a dark SUV with county plates. Dust boiled around them, coating the twilight sky in rust-colored haze. The first door opened with a creak. Out stepped Sheriff Tom Radcliffe, broad-shouldered and tired-eyed, the kind of man carved from years of keeping a restless county from tearing itself apart. His uniform was dusty, his hat pulled low, and his expression said he'd rather be anywhere else than here. From the SUV emerged a woman in a gray suit, heels crunching against gravel. She carried a sleek black case, her stride clipped, her gaze detached. Linda Monroe, Adult Protective Services. Elias knew the type before she spoke, eyes that saw procedure, before people, statutes, before stories. Rebecca Mercer called out at once, rushing toward them, voice frantic. "Sheriff, thank God. You have to help us. My father, he's not in his right mind anymore. He sold this barn, sold what's inside, and he doesn't even know what day it is. This man," she gestured at Elias, "he's trying to claim it." Elias's throat tightened. He hadn't expected allies, but hearing her condemnation out loud still sliced sharp. Sheriff Radcliffe's eyes slid toward him, heavy with calculation. Elias clenched his jaw. Something told him this was about to spin far beyond the reach of compassion. Radcliffe sighed, as though the weight of decades pressed against his ribs. He adjusted his belt, then spoke. "Mr. Grant, we've had reports about Jonah Mercer. The man's condition is well documented. Dementia. Any deals he makes, they don't hold water." Linda Monroe stepped forward briskly, snapping open her case. Her voice was precise, as if reciting from a textbook. "Until the courts finalize guardianship, all assets tied to Jonah Mercer are to be frozen. That includes this barn," and her eyes flicked briefly toward the massive shape inside the animal contained within. "No party may buy, sell, relocate, or otherwise tamper with said property until further ruling." Her words echoed cold against the barn's wooden beams. Elias stared, dumbfounded. "Frozen?" He gestured wildly at Shadow. "What about him? He's not a crate of tools or a stack of lumber. He's alive. He's dying." Linda didn't flinch. "Mr. Grant, I understand this is emotional, but our role is to ensure Jonah Mercer's interests are protected. This is a matter of law, not veterinary medicine." "Law?" Elias barked. "You're telling me the law says let him rot here until the paperwork clears? Procedure is procedure." Linda answered, clipped. The barn went quiet. Even Caleb, hot-blooded and ready to lash out, found no words. A noise shattered the stillness, a groan low and pained. All heads turned. Shadow had begun to move. The stallion staggered from the corner, his enormous frame shaking with each step. His hooves dragged across the dirt floor, scattering brittle hay. He emerged toward the doorway, toward the weak sunlight, ribs stark beneath his black hide. Rebecca gasped. Ryan muttered a curse under his breath. Caleb took a half-step forward before freezing helpless. The horse's legs buckled suddenly, his front knees dipping as though the weight of his body was too much to bear. He lurched sideways, nearly crumpling. With a desperate groan, he fought upright again, sides heaving like bellows. Dr. Hayes darted to his side, bracing his massive head as it drooped. "Easy," she murmured, stroking his neck with urgent steadiness. Then her voice snapped to the others, fierce and unyielding. "If we don't act now, he'll be dead on this dirt within the hour." The Mercers froze. Their eyes had never seen Shadow like this. Not the proud animal of their memory, but a ruin teetering at the edge. Rebecca's hands flew to her mouth, muffling a sob. Ryan's face drained pale. Caleb's chest rose and fell as though he couldn't catch his breath. But Linda only scribbled into her file, each note precise and detached, as though the great horse's collapse was nothing but data points to be entered later. Elias snapped. He strode forward, voice booming off the barn walls. "You call this justice, protecting an old man's rights by watching the only thing he ever loved die in front of him?" Linda met his fury with cold precision. "Mr. Grant, I understand your emotions, but the law cannot bend for feelings. If we allow you to interfere, it sets precedent. Next time someone else uses the same excuse to exploit a vulnerable elder." Precedent. Elias's laugh was harsh, bitter. Elias's laugh was. "You talk about precedent while a living creature gasps its last breath right here. You'll have your neat little files, your tidy rules, and tomorrow there'll be nothing left to fight over because the horse will already be a carcass." Sheriff Radcliffe stepped in, palms raised, voice heavy. "Elias, calm down. Don't make this harder. I don't want that animal dead either, but if you disobey, you put me in a corner. You force my hand." Caleb, of all people, broke in, his voice raw. "Sheriff, let him do it. Damn the rules. If Shadow dies, we lose everything anyway." Rebecca spun on her son, eyes wide. "Caleb, think about what you're saying. If he acts outside the law and Shadow dies anyway, we'll lose all claim. We'll lose him forever. That's better than watching him choke on his own lungs while we argue," Caleb roared back. The barn became a cauldron of voices. Rebecca pleading law, Caleb demanding action, Ryan trapped between reason and guilt. Sheriff Radcliffe's commands cut across the din, Linda's clipped rebuttals layering cold upon heat. All while the great horse swayed breath, rattling eyes dimming with each second wasted. Something inside Elias snapped taut. He strode past the chaos, straight toward Radcliffe and Linda. His eyes blazed like steel pulled from the forge. "Enough," he thundered. "If you want to stop me, Sheriff, then do it. Cuff me, drag me out. But know this, when this horse dies, and it will, his blood won't be on me. It'll be on every one of you who stood here quoting rules while a living soul begged for help." The words cracked through the barn like thunder. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Linda's hand faltered over her pen. For a heartbeat, her mask slipped, but then it was back smooth as stone. Sheriff Radcliffe's jaw clenched. His eyes met Elias's, weary and torn, the look of a man caught between oath and conscience. He said nothing. "Teriraha yanahajt," Hayes's voice cut through, hushed but insistent. "I can save him. Right now, I have the kid in my truck. But if I move without consent, I'm breaking the law too." Elias turned his stare, pinning Rebecca like a blade. "Say it. Do you want the law, or do you want your father's horse alive?" Rebecca's lips trembled. Tears streaked her face, but words would not come. She choked on silence, paralyzed. Shadow gave his own answer. With a groan that rattled the walls, the horse's legs folded. His great head swung low, striking the dirt floor with a hollow thud. Dust plumed around him as he lay, half-collapsed chest heaving in broken rhythm. The world froze. Rebecca cried out. Caleb surged forward instinctively. Ryan whispered, "No, no, no." Elias dropped to his knees beside the beast, pressing a hand against the trembling neck. The warmth under his palm was fading. His throat burned. "No," he rasped. Not like this. You hear me? You don't quit on me. I won't let you die here. Not in this damn barn. Shadow's eye rolled faintly toward him, dim but alive. Elias bowed his head close, his voice raw, fierce, breaking. I'll fight for you. I don't care who stands in my way. The barn still shook with the echo of Elias's defiance. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was Shadow's shallow rasp, dragging every ounce of life he had left from the thick air. Then Elias reached into his jacket, pulled out his battered wallet, and flipped it open with trembling hands. The leather was cracked, the bill's inside soft and worn from too many years of being stretched too thin. He counted slowly, each note feeling heavier than the last, until he had a pitiful stack clutched in his fist. $400. He pressed it into Dr. Hayes' hand. This is everything I've got, he said hoarsely. Start now. Linda Monroe snapped shut her file, her voice like a lash. Mr. Grant, that would be a direct violation of court procedure. You are interfering with frozen property. You can and will be charged. Elias met her gaze with steel. If the law demands I stand by and watch a living creature die because of paperwork, then the law can damn well charge me. I'll take the cuffs. But I won't take his death. For the first time, Linda faltered. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, eyes flickering. Sheriff Radcliffe exhaled long and weary. His hand hovered near the cuffs at his belt, then dropped. He stepped back a pace, voice rough. Do what you need to do, Hayes. I didn't see anything. Rebecca let out a sob, burying her face in her hands. She didn't stop them. She couldn't. The choice had been made. Dr. Hayes moved with lightning precision. Her kit snapped open, revealing coils of IV tubing, syringes, and vials. I need hands, she barked. Ryan stepped forward first, kneeling to cradle Shadow's great head against his thigh. Caleb followed, muttering curses under his breath, but sliding his arms beneath the horse's shoulder to keep him steady. Elias crouched beside them, both stroking the trembling neck. You're not giving up on me, he whispered to the stallion's flickering eyes. Not here. Not like this. You fight and I'll fight with you. Hayes slid a catheter into the swollen vein, clear fluid dripping steadily through the tube. Shadow shuddered violently, then settled as the cool lifeline coursed through his system. She followed with an injection of antibiotics, her voice steady, though her hands moved with urgency. We're buying time, she warned. This won't hold long. He needs proper equipment at my clinic. Then let's move him, Elias said immediately. Carefully, Hayes emphasized. One wrong collapse and he'll crush himself in you. Elias nodded grimly. Then we carry him together. It took all of them to coax the giant out of the barn. Hayes backed her trailer into position, its ramp lowered. Shadow balked, once knees buckling, and nearly went down hard. Caleb grunted with effort, bracing his massive shoulder against the animal's side. Elias seized the halter, pulling with steady calm, whispering encouragement into the flicking ear. That's it. One more step. Don't quit on me now. Rebecca's hands trembled as she clutched the rail, praying under her breath. Ryan pushed from the rear face, contorted with strain. Inch by inch, the horse moved forward. Twice he sagged, nearly collapsing. Twice they caught him, adrenaline snapping through their muscles. Finally, with one last desperate heave, Shadow staggered up the ramp and into the padded trailer. Hayes slammed the gate shut. That's the hardest part. Now we keep him calm. Sheriff Radcliffe started his cruiser lights flashing. I'll clear the way. The Mercer truck fell in behind. Elias climbed into the trailer without hesitation. He settled on the straw beside Shadow's head, one hand on the horse's neck, the other bracing the IV line. Easy, big guy, he murmured as the wheels rumbled to life. You're not alone in this. The drive stretched like an eternity. Every pothole jarred the horse's fragile frame. Every corner brought a stumble hoof, striking the walls with hollow thuds. Elias steadied him each time, murmuring like a soldier speaking to a wounded comrade on a battlefield. You're just like one of us, he whispered. A fighter carried home. I won't leave you behind. Not this time. The trailer swayed. Outside, sirens wailed, clearing the empty roads of Montana twilight. They arrived at the clinic just as the last light drained from the sky. Hayes jumped from her truck, yanking the doors wide. Shadow took one step down the ramp, then his body gave way. The massive stallion crumpled his weight, crashing against the padded floor with a bone-shaking thud. Rebecca screamed. Caleb's voice broke raw. He's gone, damn it. He's gone. But Hayes was already moving, syringe in hand. She plunged a stimulant into the vein, shouting, "Hold his head steady." Elias slid under the stallion's skull, lifting the heavy muzzle onto his lap. The horse's eye was half shut, the breath rattling shallow and broken. No, Elias whispered fiercely. His hand trembled on the sweat-slick hide. Don't you dare leave me now. I chose you. That means you choose me. You live. Minutes stretched mercilessly. Then with a ragged groan, Shadow's chest rose deeper, fuller. His eyes blinked open, foggy but present. He stared at Elias as if tethered by some fragile but unbreakable thread. Hayes sagged in relief, her hands still moving. He's not safe yet, but he's fighting. And that's something. Rebecca collapsed against Ryan, sobbing. Caleb turned away, hiding his wet eyes. Elias stroked the trembling muzzle, his whisper fierce but tender. You're still here. That's all I need. The clinic lights hummed softly as they worked through the night. Shadow lay under monitoring fluids, dripping into his veins, his chest rising steadier with each hour. Exhaustion weighed on them all. Sheriff Radcliffe's phone buzzed, breaking the silence. He answered, listened, then stepped into the waiting room. When he returned, his face was solemn, but different, softer, almost reverent. That was the nursing home, he said quietly. Jonah Mercer had a moment of clarity tonight. The staff said it was sudden but sharp as day. He kept repeating one thing: sell Shadow to the man who needs him. He held up a form. 3 staff signed as witnesses. It's in writing. Rebecca's knees buckled. Tears streamed freely down her cheeks. He remembered. Even now, he remembered Shadow. Caleb stared blankly, speechless. Ryan bowed his head, jaw tight with emotion. Elias froze, the words echoing through him. For the first time since this nightmare began, he felt the weight lift just slightly, as if the old man himself had passed the burden to him willingly. Jonah had chosen. By dawn, the paperwork had reached the county prosecutor. Sheriff Radcliffe relayed the update in person, his boots heavy on the clinic floor. They've reviewed Mercer's records, he said. Legally, the $10 sale doesn't stand, but his statement tonight, clear witnessed, gives moral weight. The prosecutors decided this isn't criminal. No charges, not theft, not obstruction. This is a family matter now. He clapped a heavy hand on Elias's shoulder. You're free, Grant, at least as far as the law is concerned. Elias barely registered the words. His eyes were fixed on Shadow, who lay breathing steadier, the dull fog lifting from his gaze. Freedom meant nothing compared to that. Night had fallen again when the clinic finally quieted. Machines hummed, fluids dripped, exhaustion hung like smoke over them all. Elias sat where he'd been since the moment they arrived, beside Shadow, one hand resting on the horse's neck, unwilling to leave even for a second. His back ached, his eyes burned, but he refused to move. Rebecca approached slowly, her voice raw, uncertain. Maybe my father was right all along. Shadow doesn't need us anymore. He needs you. Elias glanced up. Her eyes brimmed with reluctant acceptance. Caleb and Ryan lingered behind silent, but after a long pause, they both gave small, reluctant nods. Dr. Hayes checked the IV one last time. Fatigue etched into her features. A faint smile curved her lips. If he makes it through tonight, his odds improve. He's not out of the woods, but he's got a chance. Elias leaned close, whispering into Shadow's flickering ear. Hear that, big guy? This is just the start. You and me, we're not done yet. The horse's eyelid fluttered as though in answer. Elias squeezed tighter, a vow binding in his chest. Whatever came next, money, family disputes, the uncertain fight for survival, none of it mattered more than this. Shadow had chosen to live, and Elias had chosen to stand beside him. Morning sifted into the clinic like pale grain, filling the white halls with a softer light than the night before. Machines hummed steadily, the kind of sounds that stop sounding like machines when you've listened long enough, just the breath of a place that keeps things alive. Shadow slept in the recovery stall, fluids still dripping into the vein at his neck, chest rising slow and even. The danger had not vanished, but it had stepped back. Elias stood with his forearms on the half-door eyes, tired jaw rough with a day and night of stubble. He could feel the knots in his shoulders, the ache in his lower back, the throb in his bad leg, but he didn't move. He watched the black stallion breathe. In, out, as if each breath were a small miracle the world had decided to grant. Behind him, the waiting room door hissed open. Boots scuffed, chairs scraped. The Mercer family filed in, Rebecca first, then Caleb and Ryan, and Sheriff Tom Radcliffe came with them. Dr. Hayes slipped out of the next room, pulling a paper mask down around her neck, her expression a mixture of caution and a quiet satisfaction she didn't want to jinx. Rebecca looked smaller than she had the previous night, as if grief had taken a pair of shears to her spine. She folded her hands together, wringing them once, and then forced herself to meet Elias's eyes. He made it through the night, she said, as if needing to hear the words aloud. For now, Hayes answered gently. His vitals are holding, but he'll need weeks, months of care. Regular feedings, gradual rehydration, antibiotics, rest, and careful work on that leg. Silence settled with them. Sheriff Radcliffe pushed his hat back a fraction and cleared his throat. Figure we ought to talk, while everyone's clear-headed. Rebecca nodded, and for a long moment, only the ticking, dripping breathing held the room together. Then she spoke, the words heavy and honest. We can't do it, she said. We can't take care of him. Every dollar we have goes to Dad's care. There isn't anything left over, not even for the essentials. I hate saying it out loud, but it's the truth. Her jaw trembled. She steadied it with will. If we bring him back to our land, he'll go downhill again. Caleb stared at the floor as if it had offended him. Whatever fight he'd had the day before had burned down to embers. He listens to you, he muttered, not looking up. Last night, he wouldn't have stood at all if you hadn't been there. Ryan lifted his gaze, steady and blunt. You're the only one who can give him the time he needs. Elias glanced from one face to another, then back to the horse. The weight of their confession did not feel like a victory. It felt like a responsibility hitching itself to his shoulders. He took a breath. I'll take him, he said. Rebecca's head snapped up. I'll take responsibility, Elias continued. Feeding meds, rehab, the shoeing for that bad leg. I'll do the work and cover the cost however I can. And if he paused, choosing the least worst word, if there ever comes a day I have to sell him, you'll get half of whatever comes from it. Caleb made a small sound, half protest, half relief. Ryan's shoulders loosened. Rebecca studied Elias as if searching him for cracks. "Why half?" she asked softly. "Because he's your father's pride," Elias said. "Because this shouldn't feel like losing him." Rebecca's composure wavered, then settled. "And visits," she said, voice thickening. "We want to see him. We want to bring Dad on his good days." Elias nodded without hesitation. "As often as you want. I'll load him in the trailer myself, or you can come to my place. Either way." A boyish voice piped up from the doorway, startling them all. Every month, Michael said the grandson, who had come in behind the others, quiet as a shadow. He stepped closer, cheeks chapped from the morning wind. At least once a month. For Grandpa. Elias extended his hand to Rebecca, then to Caleb, then to Ryan and Michael, and finally to the sheriff, who clasped it with a faint, approving grunt. "Deal," Elias said. No papers, no seals. Only a handshake and a last wish from an old man who'd found clarity just long enough to choose where love should land. Somehow it felt more binding than ink. The work began that afternoon and did not stop. The first weeks were a strict routine that left no space for anything else. Dr. Hayes came every few days at first, then once a week, then bi-weekly as Shadow stabilized. She drew up schedules, adjusted dosages, and taught Elias a dozen little things that added up to survival. How to introduce soaked alfalfa and oats without shocking a starving gut. How to check capillary refill time. How to gauge a pain response in the eye and in the tightness of the flank. How to wrap a leg properly and when to let the swelling speak. Elias sold the one thing no one ever wanted to buy: his time. Day labor at dawn, fencing for Nolan on odd days, fixing pumps and clearing irrigation ditches. He bartered where he could and paid where he couldn't. The cash that used to vanish into rent and bad coffee vanished now into feed, into antibiotics, into farrier visits, and a set of orthopedic shoes forged by a man 3 towns over who shaped iron like prayer. At his small place outside Red Hollow, Elias cleared a stall with the care of a man, setting a table for an honored guest. He pulled the splintered boards, scrubbed the trough until his knuckles stung, filled a manger with measured dampened hay. The first day Shadow stepped into that stall, he lowered his massive head and stood for a long time with his muzzle hovering over the water as if he had forgotten how to want it. Then slowly he drank. Nights were the hardest. Twice, 3 times, sometimes more. Elias woke to check the slow rhythm of Shadow's breath. He learned the sound of a dangerous stillness and the sound of a body finally resting. Sometimes he slept on the straw, one hand on the horse's neck, the heat of a life under his palm. Dreams still came, but they broke differently now. Lighter like waves that reached only to his knees and then receded. Neighbors watched the ritual with a skepticism that softened as weeks slipped by. Nolan arrived one afternoon with a spool of wire and a thermos of black coffee. "Fence line by the east pasture looks hungry," he said. "Figured I'd feed it." He left without waiting for thanks. Others came a steady trickle of practical kindness, an extra bale from a woman with too many a jar of salve, from a man whose wife swore by it, a teenager offering to muck in exchange for learning how to hold the big horse's head without the rope going tight. And slowly, as winter leaned toward spring, Shadow grew again. Not like a sapling shooting up overnight, but like a tree reclaiming its rings quietly, inexorably. The hollows along his ribs softened with muscle and new flesh. The dull coat turned sleek. The scar on his shoulder remained an old brand of pain, but it sat on a body that could carry it. There were setbacks, days when he favored the bad leg more than he should, mornings when the appetite flagged a bout of rain rot that appeared out of nowhere and demanded attention. But they learned how to weather them. Hayes adjusted the plan, wrote new notes in neat, relentless handwriting, and Elias kept showing up. Persistence turned out to be a kind of medicine too. By 6 months, the farmyard sounded different. Work had a rhythm again, not frantic and rushed, but steady and strong. Elias started with ground driving, teaching Shadow to respond to cues with lines across his withers, the stallion's ears flicking back to catch the man's voice. They dragged a wooden sled first, then a harrow over the pasture to break up the manure and aerate the grass. Shadow pulled slow at the start, and each step a question. Elias answered with patience and praise until the steps became sure. The first day, Elias hitched a light plow behind the stallion. He did it with hands that felt reverent. He looped the lines, checked each trace, and buckled twice, then walked to Shadow's head and looked into the dark eye that had once been cloudy with pain. "We'll go easy," he said. "And we stop the second you tell me." He kissed his knuckles, an old ranch habit he hadn't realized he'd kept, pressed them to the white star on Shadow's forehead, and took his place at the handles. The soil was damp and generous from a week of late spring rain. Elias clucked his tongue. Shadow leaned into the harness. The plow bit. A dark ribbon of turned earth unspooled behind them, neat as a seam. They reached the end of the row and stopped. Elias wiped his face with his sleeve and laughed, breathless. The laugh startled birds out of the cottonwoods. Shadow shook his mane, then turned his head enough to fix his big eye on the man, as if to say, Well, Elias said, voice breaking a little, "I'll be damned. You're back." They went again, and again. By midday, one field had a spine of furrows as straight and handsome as any in Red Hollow. And a man who had believed he was finished found he was not. It was Rebecca's idea to bring Jonah that June. They waited for a good day, one when the old man was clearer, when his eyes weren't fogged with the long grayness that had settled over so much of his mind. They loaded him into the van, Michael fussing with the blankets, Caleb unusually gentle with the wheelchair, Ryan double-checking the route from the nursing home to Elias's gate. Elias had brushed Shadow until the stallion glowed. He didn't know why nerves crawled him. He only knew he wanted the moment to be right. When the Mercer van pulled up by the fence line, he was already there, hand on Shadow's cheek, whispering, "Easy, big guy. Your old friend's coming." They wheeled Jonah to the fence. The old man's head drooped, a chin against his chest. The lines on his face were deep and honest, carved by a lifetime in the sun. His eyes were dull. "Dad," Rebecca said softly, "we're here. We're with Shadow." The name trembled the air. Jonah stirred but did not lift his head. Elias clicked his tongue. Shadow pricked his ears. He walked toward the fence with a measured dignity that no injury had ever truly taken from him. Dust rose around his hooves and settled again like a blessing. As the horse drew near, Jonah's head lifted slow as sunrise. His eyes sharpened. For one piercing instant, they were the eyes of a much younger man, a rancher with shoulders broad and a voice that had not yet thinned. He reached a shaking hand through the rails. "Shadow," he whispered the word as clear as a bell on a cold morning. "Good boy." The great horse lowered his massive head until his muzzle pressed into Jonah's palm. He stood there still as a confession. The old man's fingers moved clumsy with age, mapping the curve of the face he had once known by heart. The scar, the smooth place between the eyes, the whiskers that tickled his skin. Shadow exhaled slow and warm, and Jonah laughed a short, amazed sound that made Rebecca sob openly. Caleb turned away, swiping fiercely at his face. Ryan watched with his jaw locked, as if holding his grief in place with nothing but force. Elias stood a few steps back and let the moment fill the world. He felt something twist and then settle inside him, gratitude maybe, or the knowledge that this was one of those rare things in life that could only be called right. Jonah's hand slipped from the muzzle and fell to his lap. The clarity in his eyes flickered and then dimmed like a lantern running out of oil. He blinked, searching the faces around him with confusion that returned like habit. But the smile stayed faint and stubborn. "Good boy," he said again, and then the moment was gone. They stayed as long as Jonah wanted, which turned out to be longer than anyone expected. When the van finally pulled away, Shadow watched it roll down the lane until dust swallowed it. Elias rubbed the black neck and felt the horse's breath stir his sleeve. "He knew you," Elias murmured. "That's what matters." Shadow's ear flicked toward him, then back to the empty road. The summer after that was not perfect. Nothing in this world is, but it was good. Work got done. Fields turned over. Wood got split. Elias stopped calculating every gas mile and started counting the jobs he could take again because he had a partner strong enough to haul fence posts, drag storm-felled limbs, pull the water tank to the far pasture when the pump was stubborn. He bought fewer cans of soup and more sacks of feed. He slept better. The sound of choppers in dreams faded into the rhythm of hooves on hardpan, steady and reassuring. Neighbors began to wave when they passed the lane, not just out of habit, but with a nod that said, "We see what you did there." Nolan showed up with a used harness, still good in the leather. A church group came by one Saturday and repaired the roof of the shed, without comment or sermon, leaving a plate of cinnamon rolls and a card that just said, "Keep going." Elias kept the card on a nail by the door. He came to understand Shadow's moods and the calm that meant work would be smooth, the tightness that warned him to give the stallion a day, the spark that told him they could push just a little more. He learned to laugh again when the horse nosed his pocket for carrots, to curse only half seriously when the big head knocked his hat into the dust. By fall, the nubbled pastures had greened where they could, the fence line stood straighter, and the little farmhouse didn't seem to sag so much. The place looked lived in, not endured. More than anything else, Elias understood that the empty place inside him, the one the war had left like a crater, had not been filled exactly, but had grown a garden around itself. On a gold afternoon that felt poured rather than painted, Elias sat on the top rail of the fence, arms folded on the post chin, resting there. The sun warmed his back. In the pasture beyond, Shadow grazed with his head low, tail switching lazily coat, a dark mirror of the sky. $10, Elias said aloud, and a small grin tugged his mouth. For a barn that should have fallen over if I sneezed too hard. The wind picked up and trailed a hand through the grass. Somewhere, a hawk cried. Shadow raised his head, a blade of grass hanging from his lip like a small green flag. He looked at Elias for a long moment, then flicked an ear and went back to grazing. $10, Elias repeated softly, for a new life. He thought of the first night, the wheeze of a failing chest, the cold certainty of loss stalking the edges of the stall. He thought of paperwork and warnings and the way a man can get trapped by the fear of making the wrong choice. He thought of Jonah's papery voice cutting through all of it, sells Shadow to the man who needs him, and understood that maybe for once the world had arranged itself on the side of mercy. "Funny, isn't it?" he said to the horse that wasn't listening, "how saving one life ends up saving two." Shadow wandered closer, as if he had heard anyway. He pressed his forehead gently against Elias's shoulder, a touch that was as heavy and careful as a vow, and then went back to the grass. Elias slipped off the fence with the easy stiffness of a man who has worked hard and is satisfied by it. He opened the gate and Shadow walked through without being asked, as if knowing they had work to do. The harness hung on a peg, polished by use. The field waited. The barn that had started it all stood in the distance, still crooked, still stubborn against the weather. Elias looked at it and felt no bitterness, only a kind of reverence for the strange way fate had chosen its doorway. A ruin that hid a life, a sail that gave a gift. He set a hand on Shadow's neck and felt the warm, living weight beneath his palm. The stallion's ear flicked to him again. The world was what it had always been, hard, unfair, demanding. But for the moment, and maybe for the next, they were exactly where they belonged. "Come on, big fella," Elias said, voice low and content. "Let's get to it." They stepped forward together, not looking back.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us.